The state leader of the United Daughters of the Confederacy said something about Confederate monuments you may not expect.
Remove them from public display of places. I'm all for that.
Meanwhile, the scientist Team Baker used to attack St. Pete Mayor Rick Kreisman also said something you may not expect.
I'm concerned about the ad, in large part because I believe it's misleading and perhaps deceptive.
And the Democratic State House Minority Leader said something about job initiatives you may not expect.
What about the Democratic Conference? What is it doing to stimulate jobs?
That's a good question.
This is Money, Power, and Politics.
Well, as the Hillsborough Commission decided to move the Confederate monument, we saw how it fires people up. One side says moving statues erases history and dishonors Confederate veterans. The other side says they were put up during the Jim Crow era to intimidate African Americans and erase history long ago by whitewashing the cause of the Civil War. William Faulkner summed this up when he wrote, "The past is never dead, it's not even past." And when you read the endless tit for tat on social media with all the insults sewn in, it shows what Faulkner meant when he wrote, "The past is never dead." And the debate we're having today can be seen as a monument in itself to how much we've changed and grown, and how old wounds still tear us apart, and how some people on both sides can still find common ground. Which brings us to tonight's We the People.
What if the men who fought the Civil War and paid the price in blood could listen in to what's playing out today?
We are not going to go quietly into the night.
And they could listen in to how it still fires up such passion and conflict.
You wanted me to yell at you, now I'm yelling.
And how it still tears us apart.
You didn't vote! I didn't vote! He didn't vote!
They might be terribly confused.
I accept this monument in the spirit of brotherhood and peace.
75 years after Gettysburg, Union and Confederate veterans stood together. And look at this. They joined hands as Americans. That's how Ginger Rudiger remembers it, and it's why she still pays her respects to the Confederate dead, and why she honors her great-great-grandfather who fought for the South.
They had to feed their families.
And it's why she leads Florida's United Daughters of the Confederacy, which put up this Confederate monument in Tampa more than 100 years ago.
Do you see the other side's point of view in this?
I do.
But that's where this story takes a turn you may not expect.
And the Vice President of the Confederacy, Stevens, in his cornerstone speech, said that the central reason for secession was preservation of slavery.
Isn't that sad?
Rudiger says she's not authorized to speak for the United Daughters of the Confederacy, but she is the Florida leader, and her opinions may put the Confederate monument debate in a different light.
And so when people see a large statue of a Confederate soldier standing proud on a pedestal, you see how it can bring memories and symbols of racism and hatred and white supremacy.
Without a doubt, yes, without a doubt.
Why then not just take it down?
Remove them from public display of places and put them in cemeteries, or let them be moved to maybe veterans parks or some other, or maybe even like private parks or private lands. I'm all for that.
We are still fighting today.
The people who argue the war was not about slavery and the monuments must stay probably did not see that coming.
If it's on public property, and because of the issue of slavery, and because we've had so many years in our country of unfairness to minority groups, why not relocate these to places where they can be given the respect they deserve for the veteran service?
Such as a cemetery.
Exactly.
Now, to those who say the South rebelled for states' rights, she agrees about that, but says that ties back to slavery.
What would it have been more about if not slavery?
States' rights and the right to have slaves or not have slaves. Let's be perfectly frank here.
So as she sees it, Confederate monuments honor the rank-and-file soldiers who may not have known their leaders framed this war on slavery.
They didn't fight to keep slaves. They didn't have slaves.
And we're told no telling what about the cause.
A lot of people sympathetic to the Southern cause may be thinking lightning will strike you down.
They might. So maybe all you saw was a newspaper, and maybe all you saw was a flyer. You know, come and support the South, and, you know, the feds want to come in and raise the price on... See, there they are.
On that note, she said it's about time to move inside. But she left us with thoughts on the rebel battle flag that may also surprise people who display it.
The only place that ever deserves to be flown is at the headstone of a Confederate veteran. It doesn't belong in the back of your pickup truck.
What about rebel flip-flops?
Nothing with the Confederate flag
Tube tops.
is off. No, it's irreverent. It's
Thong?
not. No, no. There's nothing that should be. That flag should not be on anything but a flag at a Confederate veteran's grave. That's it.
And as she visits those graves, she remembers how they came together, with Union veterans buried just a few feet away, and how taking down rebel flags and moving Confederate monuments from public land may help us come together as they came together in that spirithood of brotherhood and peace.
Now, here's one of the early complaints we received on this. This traitorous woman and the reporter, too, no doubt obviously have no understanding whatsoever of what Alexander Hamilton Stevens was really saying in his cornerstone speech. So let's read directly from that speech in which Stevens explained why the South rebelled. Stevens wrote, "The Confederate foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition." And in the official declarations of secession, Louisiana declared a necessity and determination to preserve African slavery. Texas declared the servitude of the African race is mutually beneficial. A blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization, and that none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. And Alabama added that ending slavery would expose, quote, wives and daughters to pollution and violation to gratify the lust of half-civilized Africans. Those are direct quotes from the Confederate leaders as they explained what the war was about. But that often gets lost in an age of instant communication in which people spread misconceptions, like Lincoln had slaves. He did not. And Maine was a slave state. It was not. And that some of the worst treatment of slavery was to the Irish. Look it up, people. Well, if you look that up, you may find more than 80 Irish historians who have debunked that. And with this, we have disagreements, bottom line, over history. And a lot of people who want to keep Confederate monuments in public land do not therefore associate those monuments with the institution of slavery. Keep in mind, our goal in this show is to explain why people see things the way they do and bring in perspective that may challenge conventional wisdom on both sides. And in the big picture, since our elected officials make important decisions, we also put them to the test to see how well they've thought things through. And that's why we've also shown you when they dodge or commit gaffes on both sides, from the governor on down, on a lot of issues, like the time the governor changed his mind, for example, on expanding Medicaid and tried to deny it. How and why did you change your mind on that?
Oh, I didn't change my mind at all.
We'll be looking at that over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I don't remember saying a few weeks. I don't think that's what I said.
And that brings us to a gaffe this week from the State House Minority Leader, Janet Cruz. She leads the Democratic House lawmakers in the Florida legislature. Here's an excerpt from our interview. Governor Scott won 2 elections in this state, fixating on the issue of jobs. Tell me what the Democratic Conference is doing to advance new jobs in Florida.
I can tell you what I'm doing to create jobs in my district.
Yes.
Okay. Every year for the past 7 years, I host a job fair in my district, and it's taking place next Wednesday, the 26th. from 10 to 2 at Higgins Hall, which is on the corner of Hillsborough and Himes Avenue. And we have 100 employers that will be coming in. All of them, the only criteria that I require is that they're hiring.
And that's what you're doing as an individual lawmaker. What about the Democratic Conference? What is it doing to stimulate jobs?
Well, that's a good question.
And something to work on for the next session.
Yeah, we're going to edit this because I don't know the answer to that.
Probably not, but it's something that you're focused on?
Yes.
Outstanding. Representative Cruz, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Now, to her credit, she asked for a do-over interview, so here's how she regrouped. Tell me what the conference, the Democratic Conference, is doing to stimulate hiring and new jobs in Florida.
Well, I think it's important to back up and say, how do we create more than just entry-level positions? How do we create a job, or how do we put someone in a position where they can have a better quality of life and support a family so that they don't need help from the rest of us? So how do we do that? Well, I think we create good technical programs for those folks that are not particularly cut out to go to college, and maybe we make college more affordable.
Higher education more available, more technical training. These are very good goals to have. What about a plan, legislation to make it happen?
Well, we have to, stay focused and divert and define some of those education dollars for some of these programs.
After this interview, we asked the Democratic House Office for a list of specific ways it plans to create jobs. A jobs plan the Senate includes expanding Medicaid and some other things you may not typically associate with a jobs plan, like banning fracking and passing new gun safety measures. A spokesman said that would make Florida a cleaner and safer place and would therefore attract more jobs. We can see much more of the House Democrats' jobs plan on my Facebook page. Search for Fox 13's Craig Patrick. And now coming up, we'll investigate plans to bring a Cuban consulate to St. Petersburg from both sides, and we'll show you how a scientist is calling out an attack ad which calls the mayor one of the biggest polluters in St. Pete history.
This is the heart of Havana's tourist district. We spent a week here last March when President Obama opened the door and American tourists flooded in.
The people here are fantastic. I think everyone is just looking for an opportunity.
We couldn't miss the musicians and the restored classic cars that serve as taxis for the tourists, and in our case, traveling journalists. But when we looked through windows and doors, we saw people toiling in the dark. And just beyond the tourist district, blight at every turn and buildings falling apart. And people flagged us down to talk politics.
Last years, in my dreams, I looked at Hillary, president, in my dreams.
Well, he was right about the in his dreams part.
Hillary, hello. You are the next president of the United States.
Many Cubans wanted Hillary Clinton because they like U.S. money pouring in to help them rebuild and figured that President Trump would cut much of it off. And they were right.
Effective immediately, I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba.
Keep in mind, the Castro regime jailed and murdered its critics for decades. And during our trip to Havana, Cubans quietly told us their government still runs like the mafia, demanding money and kickbacks at every turn. Well, the president figures that reeling in travel and tourism money will drive the Castro regime to reform. That's why he kept diplomatic relations. And that means we could still have a Cuban consulate in St. Petersburg. Mayor Rick Kreisman has been traveling to Cuba and working on that for years.
I think we are still very much in the running, but what I do think it does is it slows the process down.
Kreisman still wants that consulate to bring more of an international flavor to St. Petersburg and maybe bring more change to Cuba.
From someone who's been there 3 times, there was a noticeable difference in what I saw in each visit. There seemed to be more freedoms, there were more privately owned restaurants. There was a noticeable change.
But critics say the mayor's plan could backfire on our military.
The Cuban consulates, whatever they are known by all the intelligence agencies in the world as nest of spies.
E.J. Otero was the director of intelligence operations at U.S. Central Command. He agrees with the decision to keep our embassies open, but he does not want a Cuban consulate anywhere near MacDill Air Force Base. He says Cuban diplomats could use their positions to gain access to the base, then spy on it, perhaps sell secrets to the Russians, and evade prosecution as diplomats.
The protection that diplomacy gives you is that if you're caught spying on MacDill Air Force Base, you will be thrown out of the country, maybe, but definitely you're not going to be arrested.
But Mayor Kreisman says he trusts our military to protect our national security, so he'll keep working on landing that consulate. So now, 2 years after we reopen the embassies, we still have a sharp debate over what we should discuss and where we should do it.
Well, for now, St. Petersburg is caught up in an even hotter debate over who should lead the city. Mayor Kreisman is facing a challenge from former Mayor Rick Baker. And Team Baker is running a vicious attack ad on Kreisman, and there are some points here that caught our attention that we want to put in context.
Kreisman, one of the biggest polluters in St. Petersburg history.
The ad rips Kreisman for closing one of the city's sewage plants, then downplaying a massive release of partially treated sewage when heavy rains overwhelm the system. And it includes the voice of David Hastings, a marine science expert at Eckerd College.
Bacteria that are going to make us sick.
Well, I called Hastings to ask him to explain his concerns about this, and he responded by attacking the ad that uses him attacking Kreisman.
I'm concerned about the ad in large part because I believe it's misleading and perhaps deceptive. In fact, the releases are not associated with one particular mayor or administration. They're a 10 and 20-year problem associated with the long-term degradation of our wastewater treatment systems.
So the scientist Team Baker used in its ad said Kreisman shares responsibility in the city sewage problem with other prior mayors, including Rick Baker. Let's go back to another key point in the ad.
It was one of the worst environmental disasters in our history.
Well, it was a serious problem, no doubt, but some people could take exception to calling it one of the worst environmental disasters in our history, including victims of the Exxon Valdez, the BP oil spill, the oil fires in Kuwait, 3 Mile Island, and Chernobyl.
Nearly 200 million gallons of sewage was dumped into our bay and neighborhoods after Rick Kreisman closed the Albert Whitted treatment plant.
Well, keep in mind the city decided to close the plant before Kreisman took office, but Kreisman did follow through with it. The mayor stresses that the spill from Hermine was partially treated and not raw sewage, but to Team Baker's point, experts like David Hastings say it's still a problem.
Sewage that threatened our water, our businesses, and our health.
And to that end, Hastings said he could not disagree with that point of the ad.
Now he's forcing us to pay for it.
Well, to that point, Kreisman is pushing for a plan to fix the system that's been failing the city for decades.
Then Kreisman lied, telling residents that sewage water was safe.
Well, a lie means intentional deception, and Kreisman said he did not intend to relay bad information, but he did not acknowledge the severity of the spill in a timely fashion, and he's admitted that he should have handled that better. We put both Mayor Kreisman and former Baker to the test one-on-one on sewage problems and much more. Check out our interviews on our YouTube channel, search for Craig Patrick's Money, Power, and Politics, and click subscribe at the top of the page. Now, coming up, we'll dig into the Russia investigation and all the leaks with former FBI insider Dave Couvertier. Well, as the investigation of Russia plays out, we have some inside perspective from now former FBI Special Agent Dave Couvertier, and Marissa Lynn got his take.
The president claims that FBI has an all-time low morale within their organization. What do you think he means by that?
The FBI is very strong. The FBI is forward-leaning, very resilient, and they are very much mission-focused. So I think his words in what he was trying to explain may have been his confidence in Director James Comey at the time. So I think it was more of a personal frustration with lack of progress on issues that he thought were important, like the leaks. He wanted to kind of stop that and contain that, and rightfully so. But I don't believe, and even then I assessed that he was not pleased with the director's response to all of that as well.
What motivates someone to want to leak information within the FBI?
trying to hurt someone, for example, revenge. Maybe they perceive an injustice and they feel they have to get this information out.
Mm-hmm.
And another big one that I've seen is politically motivated. They're not getting their way, or they're trying to help their political agenda, or they feel, again, a combination of those issues where there's an injustice politically, for example. But none of those is justification for doing that.
Dave, thank you for your time.
You betcha, anytime. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And coming up, since the Republican health care plan collapsed, how do they regroup? With the Republican failure on health care reform, where do they go from here? Well, let's start with the fact that Republicans are not giving up. They will continue to try to round up the votes they need in the Senate, but it is an uphill battle for sure. With that, expect movement to bring in Democrats to the table to try to come up with some common things that they can do, like trying to bring down the soaring cost of prescription drugs. Meanwhile, they'll try tax reform. Won't be easy for other reasons, because they went with health care reform first to try to get some cost savings to fund the tax cuts. We will continue to follow it, folks. That's our show. We'll see you next week.